Your 515 Fantasy Football.
I know football. Are you ready for some football?
Domination on Sundays begins with listening to these guys on Thursdays.
You ready for this?
Over 40 years of fantasy football experience between them.
Yeah!
One is a proud veteran of the United States Marine Corps, husband and father, entering his 19th year of fantasy competition. Brian Eikenberry. The other, also a proud husband and father, is one of the winningest fantasy minds in the state. Celebrating 25 years of excellence, Andy Hall.
Let's get the game on!
It's showtime. The 515 Fantasy Football Show with your hosts, Andy Hall and Brian Eikenberry.
A very busy Week 12. Bye weeks in the rear view, a Thanksgiving Day trio of games on the docket, and a playoff picture now beginning to take shape in your fantasy football league. Thanks for tuning in. Andy Hall gearing up for you this week's games before the onslaught of tequila and tryptophan knocks me out for a few hours later on, probably during the Cowboys-Chargers game. Be nap time for yours truly. The show, as always, available Thursdays at 11 a.m. on 1350 a.m. and 102.1 FM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. Digitally as well via Apple Podcasts /iTunes, Stitcher as well, and some other select spots. 515 Fantasy Football on Facebook. Give us a like there. We're on Twitter at 515 Fantasy. Reach out if you need anything from me. Over the course of the hour, all the matchups, grades on all the fantasy relevant players. Got your bargain bin segment sponsored by Twisted Vine Brewery later on. A recap of Week 11 of the Listener League as well. That's presented by our friends at Iowa Firecracker. Diving right into the matchups because we have a whole lot of them to break down. Begin with Minnesota at Detroit. First, the visiting Vikings. Case Keenum will see a Lions secondary that ranks 20th in the league in passing yards allowed. They have given up, I should say, 12 passing scores. Now, none of those were thrown by Keenum, who was held to only 219 passing yards back in the Vikings' Week 4 loss in Minneapolis. Keenum is a B- this week because I think that Minnesota passing game is clicking more consistently now. His pass catchers, Adam Thielen, is a B+, excellent PPR play, but can also get it done in standard. He likely avoids Darius Slay coverage. That'll be for Stephon Diggs primarily. He's a B grade. We've seen Diggs beat some of the league's best cover corners, so I'm not too scared here. He finished Week 4 with 98 yards receiving, so there is plenty to like, regardless of what appears to be a tough matchup, at least on paper. Kyle Rudolph is a C+. Lions are middle of the road against the tight end position, and the runners facing a Lions defense that has given up the second most rushing touchdowns in the league with 12. They're also susceptible to pass-catching backs, so both Jerick McKinnon and Latavius Murray are in play here. Murray more the B+ grade because I think he's the more bigger touchdown threat. McKinnon is a B-, slight uptick if you're in a PPR league, maybe give him a B grade. The Minnesota, that's it for that matchup, by the way. Nice and simple, right? On the Lions side, Matthew Stafford is a C+, facing Minnesota's top 12 pass defense, allowing only 213 passing yards per game, having given up only 10 scores through the air on the season. Golden Tate runs out of the slot. He's the most likely to finish with respectable stats, avoiding coverage by Xavier Rhodes, who doesn't typically follow slot guys around. Tate is a B for me this week. Marvin Jones gets the Rhodes treatment, but he's been hot in recent weeks, so still a startable C grade for him. Vikings are good against the tight end position, so I'm leaving Eric Ebron on the bench. Amir Abdullah ran for 94 yards and a score back in Week 4. I don't expect that again against the Vikings, who allow only 3.3 yards per carry. That's second best in the league, by the way. C grade on Abdullah based purely on volume. Theo Riddick involved a bit in the passing game. I guess if you're in a full PPR league, Theo Riddick might be a C grade. Otherwise, I'll just leave him on the bench. Chargers at Cowboys. For the Chargers, Phillip Rivers facing a much improved Cowboys secondary that doesn't give up a ton of passing yards, but has allowed 18 passing scores on the season. Rivers seems to have found his chemistry with Keenan Allen and Tyrell Williams of late. He's a B+ this week. The aforementioned Allen, an A grade. I feel bad for those that have run out of patience and given up on him before last week's explosion of fantasy goodness. And believe it was an explosion, wasn't it? Williams, I'm giving a C+ to this week and can't trust either of the tight ends, unfortunately, both on the bench. Runners, it begins with Melvin Gordon facing a Cowboys defense that allows over 115 rushing yards per game on average. And like the Lions, they tend to give up more production to pass catching backs like Gordon, who's a B+ this week. Austin Eckler, not going away, also contributes. He's a C+ because there is a burst there that always has potential to break away for a score from anywhere on the field. There is something to like about Austin Eckler. Just don't panic on Melvin Gordon. I told you so. Over to the Cowboys, Dak Prescott may or may not get some of his regular protection back this week. Tyron Smith is specifically who I'm talking about here. He gets a top 10 ranked Chargers secondary featuring two of the league's best cover corners. Passing game downgrade for Dallas this week. Prescott can contribute with his legs, so I guess I'll give him a C+ begrudgingly. Des Bryant, a C+ as well, likely drawing Casey Hayward in coverage, which has been a very bad matchup for virtually everybody this season. Not looking at Terrence Williams or Bryce Butler, but I would maybe take a chance on Cole Beasley, giving him a C grade as a dart throw. Jason Whitton is on my bench. Chargers are elite against the tight end position and have been all year. Alfred Morris should see a decent amount of touches here. He's a B+ facing a Chargers defense that has allowed more rushing yards than anyone in the league, an average of nearly 140 per game. And as far as pass-catching backs go, the Chargers are giving up the second most fantasy points per game in terms of receptions, yards, and touchdowns to the running back position. So Rod Smith is on the radar, a solid B grade for Rod Smith this week, especially in PPR leagues. The last of the Thanksgiving trio, New York Giants at Washington. Begin on the Giants side, another favorable matchup for Eli Manning in that passing game. Redskins ranked 25th in terms of passing yards allowed. 18 passing scores have been given up on the season by Washington. Manning's a B grade. Sterling Shepard expected back in the lineup following a week off due to migraines back in Week 11. Sees Josh Norman only when he's lined up on the right-hand side of the field. Norman not a guy that follows guys around too much. He typically stays to that one side. Shepard is an A- this week. Roger Lewis has to be mentioned after that amazing catch he had last week. A C-grade dart throw. Tight end Evan Ingram faces a Redskins defense that has allowed 6 touchdowns to the tight end position this season and the second most receiving yards to the position. A grade for Ingram. Orleans Darkwa, the back, he's the only back I'm interested in this week, facing a Skins defense, giving up over 114 rushing yards per game. Plenty of production of pass catchers as well. A total of 12 scores to the position this season. Lot to like about Darkwa, who went up over 20 touches last week. He is a B+ this week. And what about those Redskins on the offensive side of the ball? Kirk Cousins, A grade, one of my favorite quarterback plays of the week. Amazingly good matchup. The Giants have allowed the 4th most passing yards on the season. They're tied for 2nd in passing scores given up with 20 this year. All signs point to a big game for Cousins and his pass catchers. Josh Doxson is a B+. Jamison Crowder, a solid B. Both guys will produce some this week, but the tight end position against the Giants, aside from one hiccup, ironically enough, Travis Kelce last week. Keep a close eye on the inactives. If Jordan Reed is in tonight, he's an A-level start. If it's Vernon Davis, more like a bankable B+ play. I do like both. If both play, both can be in your lineup. As far as running game, it's Samar J.P. Ryan, and not really much else. Honestly, Giants are just as bad against opposing backs as they are against the pass. Over 132 yards per game, and P. Ryan showed last week he's capable of a big workload. A grade for P. Ryan, virtually the last man standing in Washington. He's not technically the last man. Byron Marshall, a name to know, ladies and gentlemen. You may remember him as a former member of the Oregon Ducks. With Chris Thompson out for the rest of the season, Marshall becomes the likely change of pace and pass-catching specialist in this offense. I wouldn't start him just yet per se, but he is certainly worth rostering. No doubt about that, especially in PPR leagues. Buffalo at Kansas City begin with the Bills. Tyrod Taylor presumably under center this weekend, though who knows, right? Nobody would be surprised if the coaching staff there in Buffalo screwed this up again. Considering this is really a great matchup against a Chiefs secondary that allows over 250 yards passing per game, a total of 16 passing scores on the season, and is susceptible to quarterbacks that can run, Taylor's a solid B+ for me this week. With Kelvin Benjamin, the latest to suffer injury in that receiving core, we're looking at Deontay Thompson, Zay Jones, and Charles Clay. In that order, too, in terms of targets from Week 11. Take your pick, right? I don't consider any of them any better than dart throw C grades, although at least one of those 3 will probably find the end zone this week. Good luck figuring it out. At least LaShawn McCoy's bankable, right? Steady workload plus matchup. Shady is an A grade. For the Chiefs, Alex Smith slumping. About as bad as the Bills' secondary of late. The path of least resistance is on the ground here. But of course, that would require Andy Reid to actually commit to Kareem Hunt. Do you trust that'll happen? That is the question. Let's start with the passing game, though. Smith, a B- this week. Bills allow nearly 250 passing yards per game, but still have more INTs than touchdowns allowed this season. Easy to temper expectations on Smith, who, like I said, hasn't been lighting the fantasy world on fire past few weeks. Tyreek Hill, I do like. B+ this week. Travis Kelce, a no-brainer start. Despite a relatively tough matchup for tight ends, give him a B+ as well due to volume. So what about Kareem Hunt? Well, the Bills have given up the 8th most rushing yards in the league on the season, nearly 120 per game. Plus, they've allowed the most rushing scores with 16. I swung and missed on a great matchup last week. Willing to go there again here at the risk of becoming the definition of insanity. Hunt is an A grade. One final matchup in this segment, Tennessee at Indianapolis. We'll start with the Titans. Finally, a plus matchup for Marcus Mariota in this passing game. Indy has given up the 3rd most passing yards in the league, a total of 15 passing scores. They tend to be much tougher against the run, so plenty to like about Mariota and his receivers. Marcus is an A-. Corey Davis has been a target monster since his return from injury. The talented rookie, a B grade for me this week. Rashard Matthews, a B+. Opposing number ones have been great all year against the Colts. Eric Decker, worth a hope and a prayer, I guess, a C grade. Tight end Delaney Walker is a B+, and a great matchup for the tight end position in general. DeMarco Murray sees a Colts front 7 allowing only 4 yards per carry, but more than 111 rushing yards per contest. They've given up 10 rushing scores, 2 more through the air to opposing backs. Murray is a B grade. Derrick Henry only a C. He's not getting enough volume, but he is absolutely 100% a factor there. Over on the Colts side, Jacoby Brissett's been banged up, but coming off a bye, gets a nice matchup here. If he can go, he's facing a Titans secondary that has allowed 21 passing scores, giving up an average of 241 passing yards through the air per game. He's a B grade. T.Y. Hilton should be able to break out here. Much more exploitable matchup, B+ for Hilton. Dante Moncrief, a dart throw C grade. Tight end Jack Doyle in a neutral matchup, a C+. Frank Gore and Marlon Mack facing a top 5 run defense. Titans allowing only 3.5 yards per carry, have only given up 4 rushing scores all season long. Gore is a C grade at best. I'm leaving Mack on the bench this week. Breakneck pace for Week 12. No buys. No breaks for me. We're breaking down more Week 12 matchups next on 515 Fantasy Football on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show, heard each and every Thursday at 11 a.m. on 1350 AM and 102.1 FM ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. We're also digital. iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, online at ESPNDesMoines.com. That is our online home for the radio station. In case you missed any part of the show or want to go back and catch what I just said, because I know sometimes I talk fast. I get it. You can rewind digitally. That's the way to go, listening on demand, I think. But sometimes it is timely, as you're hearing me on the radio, and games are actually going on as we speak, or just about to, especially this being Thanksgiving Day, a very busy day for pro football. Our next set of matchups for Week 12 begin with Cleveland at Cincinnati, begin on the Browns side. Not a good matchup for Deshaun Kaiser in this passing game in general. Not that you're starting him anyway. Keep him on the bench. Cincy rank 8th in passing yards allowed. Only 12 touchdowns have been scored on them through the air. Only pass catcher I'd consider here is Corey Coleman, who actually looked pretty decent against an even tougher Jags secondary last week. C grade for double C. Keep in mind, Josh Gordon officially becomes eligible come Week 13. That's next week. Do I think he'll get on the field this season before the end of the year? I do. Do I think he'll be the Josh Gordon that we love and remember as a fantasy world beater, finished as wide receiver 1 just a few short weeks ago? Do I think he'll be that guy? I do not. Is he worth a roster spot? Hey, listen, are you deep at the wide receiver position? Are you absolutely playoff bound or in a keeper league and want to take a dart throw? Yeah, pick him up. Why not? You probably have somebody you could drop and feel okay about, right? That's what you need to look at if you want to add a Josh Gordon to your roster. Chances are he's probably already owned, though. On to the running game. Isaiah Crowell, a B grade this week. Bengals allow over 122 yards per game on the ground. Pass-catching backs tend to fare well against them, too, so Duke Johnson is in play as a flex in PPR, a C+. For the Bengals, solid matchup here for Andy Dalton and his pass catchers. B+ for the Red Rocket, facing a Browns defense that is middle of the road in terms of yards allowed, but have given up 20 passing scores. A.J. Green, therefore, an A grade, despite likely coverage from something called Breon Body Calhoun, the best of the bunch for the Browns. It's not saying much, but he's decent. I'm going to give him that, but he's not going to be able to get A.J. Green, okay? Not like we saw a couple of weeks ago with Jalen Ramsey, certainly. Brandon LaFell, a solid B this week. Number 2 wide receivers have been very good this year against Cleveland. And tight end Tyler Kroft, a B+. Browns have allowed the second most tight end touchdowns in the league, a total of 8. They give up the second most fantasy points per game to the position. I love Tyler Kroft this week. Tampa Bay at Atlanta first the Bucs, another week with Ryan Fitzpatrick under center. And though Russell Wilson had his way with the Falcons this past Monday night, much of his production came via rushing yards, if you noticed. It was an above-average passing performance for Wilson, too, but generally Atlanta are a much better team in the secondary, giving up less than 200 yards passing per game, in fact. Fitzpatrick, a shaky quarterback 2 play this week. I wouldn't start him in season long outside of desperation mode. C grade. Mike Evans will get a lot of Desmond Trufant on Sunday. Not an easy matchup. Evans gets a B grade for the size advantage. Not that you were thinking about benching him, but just know this isn't an easy matchup by any means. Deshaun Jackson, like many speed guys, should fare pretty well against Atlanta. He's also a B grade. The emergence of O.J. Howard, interesting. But I'm not starting him or Cameron Brate this week against a Falcons defense that has been absolutely elite against the position all year. Aside from what Jimmy Graham did on Monday, neither Howard nor Brate are Graham. The running game, again, all Doug Martin like it's been, a C+. Atlanta above average against the run, but do allow some running back production through the air on occasion. Charles Sims will mix in. I'm not starting him, certainly, but Doug Martin will get his touches. He'll run the ball. He'll catch the ball. It'll be a halfway decent day, thus the C+ grade. Over to the Falcons, Matt Ryan, an easy A grade for me. Tampa allows the second most passing yards per game. They've given up 17 passing scores on the season. Julio Jones, an A grade as well, even though he's been so disappointing, largely, over the course of the season. In terms of scoring, catches, yards, great when he's healthy. Touchdowns need to be there. But the Bucs have nobody that can cover him, so I'm not too concerned here. You got to start him. Mohamed Sanu looked great again last Monday. He's a B grade with upside. Not interested in any of the tight ends they've got there. Tampa have been very solid against the position this year. Devontae Freeman should be back on the field following his stay in the league's concussion protocol for the second time this season. Expecting a relatively even split in touches between he and Tevin Coleman, who was decent last Monday versus Seattle. Neither are no-brainers this week as Tampa allow less than 4 yards per carry. Where the Falcons' backs can do some major damages through the air, both are pass-catching guys, giving both B grades in this matchup. Freeman probably more the B+ option, Coleman more the B-, assuming, again, that Freeman actually plays this week. Miami at New England, Dolphins, this should be quick. Not starting this week's quarterback, whether it be Jay Cutler or Matt Moore, not interested, despite what looks to be a very favorable matchup on paper. Patriots have quietly been very awesome over the past month against the pass, if you look a little closer. Jarvis Landry, I would roll out, only a C+, though. Devontae Parker, just not cutting it for me. This has been the case the vast majority of the season. You keep hearing about how great this guy is. Where is it? I'm leaving Devontae Parker on the bench. Kenny Stills is, as always, a dart throw. Banking on a long score like he had last week. C grade for Stills. Julius Thomas, also a dart throw, C grade at tight end. Runners, 6 in one, half dozen in the other, right? Patriots are allowing 5 yards per carry. I like that. I like Kenyon Drake over Damian Williams. Drake gets a C+ this week. Williams, I'm leaving on the bench. He's just a guy, in my opinion. On the Patriots side, Tom Brady, an easy A. Not much more to say here, other than, hey, if Cam Newton can throw for 4 scores against these Dolphins, right? Tom Brady, hello. He did throw for 356 yards and 4 scores the last time these two teams met in Foxborough. Start Brandon Cooks again this week. Totally called the explosion last week. Expecting a strong follow-up here, a B+. Danny Amendola also called that one last week. A C+. Rob Gronkowski will get a lot of that over the middle stuff. He's an A grade. Dolphins, one of the more fantasy-friendly defenses to the tight end position. And as Indians manager Lou Brown once famously said, I got a hunch he's due. As far as the running game, who knows? You know I hate this backfield and the way Belichick randomly throws guys out there. Deion Lewis, the safest play of the bunch. Rex Burkhead having lost a fumble last week, guessing he's going to see less opportunity. James White has seen a massive decrease in snaps and touches over the last month. I guess for me it's Lewis or nobody. Call that lazy. I don't care. I sound like Belichick. Next. Chicago at Philadelphia. Not a good matchup for any Bears, quite honestly. benching Mitchell Trubisky. Eagles get after the quarterback. I don't see a path to success for a rookie in this matchup. Benching all the pass catchers, even Dontrell Inman, who appears to be the best of the bunch. Somebody will do something, absolutely, but who will it be? Even the runners I don't like this week. Jordan Howard, a C grade. Eagles rank first in yards allowed on the ground. They're the best in the league. Only 4 touchdowns have been scored on them all season by opposing backs. 4 touchdowns have been scored via the air, though. So Tariq Cohen, going to give him a barely startable grade as well. C grade, but yeah, overall just not good for this team. The Eagles, slightly more exciting, okay? Not what I'd call an easy matchup for Carson Wentz and his receivers, but as we've seen from Wentz all season long, matchups be damned. Wentz gets a B+ from me this week. Bears allow only 213 passing yards per game. They've only given up 11 passing scores on the season, but there's still plenty to like here, at least in my opinion. Alshon Jeffrey, a B+. We've seen plenty of outside guys. Marvin Jones of the Lions, the latest example of this, do very well against the Chicago Bears. Slot guys, on the other hand, not so much. Great case in point. Last week when I told you to fade Golden Tate, did you listen to me? Because Golden Tate did virtually nothing against the Bears. I'm downgrading Nelson Aguilar. He's the slot guy to a C grade. And Zach Ertz, a solid start regardless of opponent, but only a B grade here. Bears are top 5 against the tight end position in terms of fantasy points per game. Only 2 tight end touchdowns have been scored on them this season. The running backs, full-blown committee happening here. Not a great matchup anyway, but extremely difficult to discern whether it'll be Ajayi or Blunt or Clemens or Barner. One of them likely hits pay dirt, but none of them are a sure thing if I had to choose. Let's put the proverbial gun right up to the head there. LeGarrette Blunt is a B-. Ajayi, a C+. Otherwise, I'm honestly not interested in any of them, even though it feels like they're just screwing with us for the fantasy community by giving touchdowns to something called Barner. And that'll do it for that matchup. One more matchup here in this segment. Carolina at the New York Jets. We'll start on the Panthers side. Cam Newton facing a Jets defense that has allowed 20 passing scores and are bad against the run as well. Now, since Cam is capable of succeeding at both, I'm giving him an A- in this matchup. It helps that he gets Greg Olsen back. Olsen, in his first week back, gets a Jets D that has given up 6 scores to the tight end position this season. Olsen is a B grade only because it may take him a bit to get up to game speed. But this guy's a pro. I guess if I am worried about one thing with Greg Olsen, it's the fact that he's never been in this position before. He has never missed a game up until this season. And now he missed a pretty large handful of games, so there may be some catching up to do. But I still like him quite a bit due to the matchup. Devin Funchess, a B+. Opposing number 1 wide receivers, always worth a look against these Jets. With Curtis Samuel injured, Russell Shepard becomes the de facto number 2 wide receiver. A C+, because I think he'll see at least 6 targets here. And who knows what he might be able to do with them. But they like Russell Shepard an awful lot there in Carolina. Wouldn't be a big surprise if they give him some more opportunity with Samuel injured. Christian McCaffrey, the only back worth starting this week. Jets, very mediocre against the run and in terms of pass-catching production from the running back position. McCaffrey, a very solid B grade this week for me. And for the Jets, Josh McCown is on the bench. Panthers, top 6 in terms of passing yards allowed. Less than 200 per game, in fact. Coming off a bye, no thanks. Robbie Anderson, the perpetual C+ dart throw as the expected targets leader. Although it could be Jermaine Kearse. Give him a C grade, the other dart throw. Both guys capable of scoring. We've seen it before, and Josh McCown can get him the ball, but who's it going to be, right? ASJ's a B-. The Panthers have allowed 5 tight end scores this year. Bilal Powell, the best of the bunch as far as the running backs are concerned, but Carolina, 3rd in rushing yards allowed. Less than 4 yards per carry. Only 4 running backs have scored on them all season. Powell is also a pass catcher, but Carolina, also very good at defending that. Powell is a C grade this week, nothing more. In fact, I expect less, as is the case most of the time with Jets players on fantasy teams. Anyway, more matchups. We're breaking down Week 12. Thank you for listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM and 102.1 FM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. The show also available digitally on a number of platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, ESPNDesMoines.com, our home on the web. Appreciate you, as always, giving us a listen. Hopefully you're already, into your Turkey Day festivities, whether that be football, family, food, or all of the above. And for me, that is exactly what it's going to be. Back into the Week 12 matchups we go. Seattle at San Francisco. We'll start with the Seahawks here. An excellent matchup for essentially all involved. Russell Wilson, an A-grade. Niners are terrible against the pass, even worse against the run. Expect Wilson to take advantage both ways and have himself a day. His pass catchers, Doug Baldwin, an A-grade. Tight end Jimmy Graham, a B. San Fran doesn't give up a ton of yards to the position, but they have allowed 4 scores on the season to opposing tight ends. Paul Richardson also in play. Talk about him a little later on in the show. The runners, well, who's left? Mike Davis is likely out. Tough break for him, having just been activated from the practice squad and hurt so quickly. Thomas Rawls, we just don't know. He was sat for Davis. Eddie Lacy's there, but not getting the field time nor the touches. J.D. McKissick, last week's bargain bin pick at the running back position, seems to be perhaps the most attractive of the options, a tepid B- for McKissick. No idea who else they may trot out there this weekend, so I'm just going to leave it at that. On the Niners side, I think C.J. Beathard may have bought himself another week's worth of playing time with the stat line he put up in Week 10 prior to the bye against the Giants. Here he gets a banged-up Legion of Boom. Maybe we should henceforth refer to them as the fall down and go boom. I don't know. In all fairness, they didn't look half bad against Matt Ryan and the Falcons passing game last Monday. No matter who's playing quarterback this week, I can't advocate you start him. Receivers, Marquise Goodwin, my bargain bin pick a couple weeks ago, looks to be the new number 1 in the Niners passing game. Volume play, a C+ with some upside. Not interested really in anyone else, quite honestly. Running game, though, it's Carlos Hyde. He's also a C+ play this week. Game script not going to be in San Fran's favor most likely this week, so it's tough to rely on a lot of touches for Hyde. New Orleans at the LA Rams for the super hot Saints. Drew Brees on the road in a relatively tough matchup. Rams top 12 in passing yards allowed, only 12 passing scores on them all season, and they're an opportunistic bunch. Breeze is a B grade at best this week. That's a lot of Bs. Good thing it's not the Fs, right? You're likely starting him, but wise to temper those expectations a tad. Michael Thomas, a B+. He's got the skill set to do what Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs were able to do last week to the Rams secondary. I guess more Thielen than Diggs got it done, but I think Michael Thomas can do it here. Not as certain about Ted Ginn, Brandon Coleman, or Willie Snead, all on the bench for me this week, though I can't lie. Super frustrated by the lack of usage for Coleman last week, who was wide open for a sure touchdown if Breeze would have seen him. Bargain bin flop in Week 11, unfortunately. I haven't had many of those this season, but I'm mad enough to admit it when it happens. Colby Fleener, a barely startable C grade in this matchup. The runners, much more excited about them. Mark Ingram, a no-brainer A grade. Rams, 28th in rushing yards allowed. They've given up 10 rushing scores and more through the air. So Alvin Kamara, also a solid start. B grade in standard. A slight boost if you're in a PPR format. Over to the Rams, Jared Goff will see a Saints secondary that pales in comparison to what the Vikings bring to the table, but all the same have been relatively stout since week 2 and starting the season 0-2. It's a whole different defense there. Giving Goff a B- this week, part of that is the defense he's facing. Part of that is losing Robert Woods, who's expected to miss at least a couple of weeks with a shoulder injury. And part of it is I think Todd Gurley will be very busy in this game. We'll get to him in a minute. Sammy Watkins, one would think he'd be stepping up his game in Woods' absence, right? Can we trust him? I say this is a good Watkins week. Marcus Lattimore may actually miss this game, making things just a bit easier on the Rams' new number 1 wideout. Cooper Kupp, a C+, some upside, but this isn't an easy matchup by any stretch of the imagination. Tyler Higbee, I'll pass on this week. Tavon Austin as well. He'll probably see increased snaps. Not worth it yet. Gurley, though, facing a Saints front 7 that gives up 4.7 yards per carry. They're 21st in rushing yards allowed, 7th in fantasy points per game to pass-catching types. A grade for Todd Gurley this week. Jacksonville at Arizona. On the Jags side, favorable matchup for Blake Bortles. If only he had some receivers to throw to. Marquise Lee, the best of the bunch, likely gets the Patrick Peterson treatment, which makes me want to fade him to a C level. Then there's Keelan Cole, who's no better than a C-plus guy despite the good matchup. D.D. Westbrook, a dart throw C grade until we actually see it. And tight end Mercedes Lewis. This could be one of those games where he decides to show up on the stat sheet. Arizona, very exploitable for opposing tight ends. Lewis gets a B- from me. Bortles, by the way, a B-. Leonard Fournette dealing with that nagging ankle injury, aggravated last weekend. Tough to trust him to handle a full workload, especially when facing a front seven like Arizona has. They're top 10 in yards allowed to the position, but have allowed 9 running back scores. And by top 10, I mean they're really, really good. Fournette, if he plays, a C-plus at best. I'm leaving everyone else on the bench. That's TJ Yeldon, Chris Ivory, and whoever else the Jaguars are hiding underneath one of those tents on the sidelines. For the Cardinals, Blaine Gabbert, despite looking pretty good last week, on the bench against this elite Jags secondary. Larry Fitzgerald, a flex-worthy C grade up against 2 of the league's best, Jalen Ramsey, A.J. Bouye. I don't think he's anything higher than a C grade, though. You probably have better options than Larry Fitzgerald, who's been very good as of late and looked really great with Gabbert under center. But this is a really tough matchup, so please keep that in mind. With John Brown, again, banged up, take your pick between Jerron Brown and J.J. Nelson. I'm leaving both on the bench personally. Not liking the tight ends either, and yes, that includes Ricky Seals Jones, RSJ, if you will. Not chasing that box score. And as far as Adrian Peterson goes, aside from 2 very easy defenses to run against where he did fairly well, he's been garbage. I'll give him a C grade here. Chances are, like Larry Fitzgerald, you've got a better option than Adrian Peterson this week. That offensive line just is not creating the space for him. Denver and Oakland begin with the Broncos. It is Paxton Lynch time, isn't it? That's what we're hearing. I've always been a fan of his, even if his franchise isn't, going with Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler before letting him loose. Lynch is on the bench this week despite a very solid matchup. Oakland 27th in passing yards allowed, 17 passing scores on them this season, 0 INT. Can't say that about anybody else in the league. Let's wait and see on Lynch if indeed that is what Denver's coaching staff decides to do. New offensive coordinator in place, Bill Musgrave, may as well start from scratch, right? That's what I think. The pass catchers should fare pretty well in this matchup no matter who's under center. Emmanuel Sanders, I give a B grade to Demaryius Thomas, a B-. Not going any deeper than that. Maybe I'd give A.J. Derby a dart throw C grade at the tight end position. Runners, big-time committee until we see differently. Raiders allow over 110 rushing yards per game to opposing backs. C.J. Anderson, the most likely guy you're thinking about starting. Only a C-plus grade for me. Frustrating to see all the touches get spread around to Devontae Booker, Jamal Charles week to week. Maybe that'll change with the new OC. We'll see. Booker is a C grade at best in case he gets a goal line look. It does appear as though they're going to mix him in at the goal line. Charles is, of course, on the bench. How about them Raiders? Derek Carr facing a Broncos defense that has allowed 22 passing scores this season. A staggering statistic considering what we've always known about this Denver D. Who's likely to succeed here? Facing Aqib Talib and Chris Harris Jr.? It's not Michael Crabtree. He's a C-plus this week. Amari Cooper, a C grade. Seth Roberts, worth a C grade dart throw, I suppose. Maybe it's Cordero Patterson. Tough, right? Jared Cook, now that's what I'm talking about. Love this matchup for Jared Cook, a B grade for him. The runners, beast mode up against a top 5 run-stopping unit. Denver allows only 3.3 yards per carry. I don't think Marshawn Lynch is the answer this week, a C-plus at best. Not interested in anyone else in that backfield. Final matchup in this segment's the Sunday nighter, Green Bay at Pittsburgh. We'll start with the Packers. Definitely not the week to roll the dice with Brett Hundley. Steelers, 4th in the league in passing yards allowed. One of only 3 teams to have given up less than 10 passing scores on the season. On top of that, they're 2nd in sacks with 34. Hundley will be running for his life on the bench. Only pass catcher I'm interested in here is Devontae Adams, and only because he's been consistently Hundley's number one option in the passing game. He's only a C grade, though. Rest of the passing game, including Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, they're all on the bench. Pittsburgh are also one of the league's best run-stopping units. Therefore, I don't like any of their running backs this week. The once mighty Pack may be shut out for a second week in a row. And if they're not shut out, it'll be close, maybe single digits. On the Steelers' side, Ben Roethlisberger gets yet another juicy matchup and finds himself in the friendly confines of Heinz Field, where he does thrive. It's historic. A- for Big Ben, only because I think Le'Veon Bell gets his too, capping Ben's ceiling just a bit. Antonio Brown, the no-brainer, A grade. Juju Smith-Schuster dealing with a very minor hamstring issue this week. A strong B grade considering the matchup, assuming he goes. Packers, the absolute best in the league against the tight end position, so I'm keeping Jesse James and Vance McDonald on the bench. You're not chasing that box score from James last week. Le'Veon Bell will see a mediocre Packers front seven this week, many of them dealing with minor injuries. They've allowed 9 rushing scores on the season, another 3 through the air. Bell is an A- for me this week, much like Big Ben. You'd think it would be an easy A grade. Well, I think because Ben's ceiling's capped by Le'Veon Bell and Bell's value is capped a bit by Big Ben in the passing game, I don't know if I can give him strong A's. A-, you're still starting him. Not that you were thinking about benching them, unless, of course, you're trying to suck. Stick around. We've got one more matchup to break down for you. That's a pretty big snoozer of a Monday nighter. We also have your bargain bin picks coming up here in just a bit, presented by Twisted Vine Brewing Company. And we also are going to recap what happened in Week 11 of the 515 Fantasy Football Listener League. It's all good for me. No question about it. You'll get that next, final segment of this week's 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. Final segment of this week's edition of the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM and 102.1 FM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. Show also available digitally, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, ESPNDesMoines.com. A lot of options in case you want to go back and listen to any part of the show anytime you like. Remember to like us on Facebook, 515 Fantasy Football. We're on Twitter as well, answering questions, giving advice at 515 Fantasy. I'm at Andy Hall Radio in case you want to hit me up personally. Our last segment includes one final matchup, the Monday Nighter, Houston at Baltimore. Kind of a snoozer, right? Let's look at the Texans. Terrible matchup for the passing game here. Not that you were thinking about starting Tom Savage per se, but DeAndre Hopkins, tough matchup. Baltimore ranked third in receiving yards allowed per game. They have given up 11 scores to opposing pass catchers, but this isn't a typical A-grade outing for Hopkins, more like a B++. That's what I'm calling it. C.J. Fedorowicz, a halfway decent dart throw at the tight end position. Baltimore have allowed 6 tight end touchdowns. Secondary receivers like Bruce Ellington on the bench. His cousin, the newly acquired Andre Ellington, likely steps in immediately and contributes in the passing game, but I'm not considering him in my fantasy lineup just yet. Lamar Miller, a C grade. Since the return of Brandon Williams, Baltimore has been one of the league's toughest to run on. Over to the Falcons, Joe Flacco in another plus matchup. Last week against a similarly leaky secondary, he only managed 183 passing yards and 1 score with an INT thrown in. That was against Green Bay. At this point, I don't care how great the matchup is, Flacco is on the bench. Jeremy Macklin, Mike Wallace, both flex-worthy pass catchers. B- for Macklin, C+ for Wallace. They're kind of interchangeable in that respect. Ben Watson's value, I should say, dropped significantly with the return of Danny Woodhead, so I'm leaving him on the bench. Speaking of Woodhead, Texans have been pretty decent against pass-catching backs, so he's a C+ in standard, a B grade in PPR due to the sheer volume. I mean, this guy's being targeted a ton right out of the gate, right out of injury. No surprise to me. He was targeted 6 times in Week 11. Alex Collins remains the primary ball carrier. Wouldn't be surprised to see another 20-plus touch performance here, but Houston have been great against the run all season, allowing less than 4 yards per carry, only 3 rushing scores. Collins is a C+ at best. Let's jump right into the bargain bin segment, sponsored by our friends at Twisted Vine Brewing Company on Westtown Parkway in West Des Moines, online at twistedvinebrewery.com. All I'm going to say is, Brown-Eyed Girl, it's back. You have to try this. They've got 30 beers on tap, 25 of which are brewed on site, and they've got wine as well. They've got pizza, they got popcorn, and they got the Red Zone on Sundays. So head on out and watch some Red Zone at Twisted Vine Brewery on Westtown Parkway. One quarterback, one running back, one pass catcher for Week 12. My quarterback this week is Tyrod Taylor. I feel like Sean McDermott could use a friend. Perhaps I should consider sending him a fruit basket or something and say it's courtesy of the fantasy football community at large. I mean, it's because of his boneheaded benching of Tyrod Taylor in Week 11 that many fantasy owners then decided to drop Tyrod, throwing him to waiver wires everywhere. If this has occurred in your league, it has happened in a couple of mine. What are you waiting for? Grab him. His remaining schedule is one of the juiciest, like a ripe pear in that fruit basket. This week, he gets a Chiefs defense that has allowed the fourth most passing yards in the league, a total of 16 touchdowns through the air. They're also susceptible to quarterbacks that can run. Easy money, well worth taking a chance on in Week 12, possibly beyond. So thank you, Sean McDermott. Let's do lunch. My running back this week, Samaje Perine of the Redskins. You don't need me to tell you that the Giants' defense is and has been a complete dumpster fire, all right? You're also wise enough to have noticed the Redskins really don't have anybody left at running back now that Chris Thompson has been lost for the season following a gruesome leg injury in Week 11. Now, Perine won't necessarily be that guy and immediately start catching 4 to 5 passes per week, but he is a big volume guy in the carries department behind a decent offensive line, and this week facing a Giants front seven that has allowed the third most rushing yards in the league, over 132 per game in fact. Perine also likely gets all the short yardage goal line work while rookie Byron Marshall works his way in as sort of that change of pace guy going forward. Samaje Perine available in about 50% of Yahoo leagues at this point. Paul Richardson, Seattle Seahawks, my pass catcher in the bargain bin this week. The Niners are well known as a defense that produces fantasy superstars on a weekly basis. They're terrible against the run, but the Seahawks don't have anybody I believe can truly take advantage of that fact besides quarterback Russell Wilson, who, by the way, can also beat you with his arm. Oh, and is leading the Seahawks in rushing this year. Isn't that crazy? And against these Niners, there's no doubt he will be throwing some. Thing is, San Fran gives up far more fantasy production to secondary receivers than they do the primary pass catchers. So Doug Baldwin, while I like him a lot this week, may be taking a backseat to Seattle's super secondary speedster, and that is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Richardson. Explosion potential through the roof. Those are my bold calls for Week 12. Hopefully you can use one or more of them and help you, get the big W here in Week 11. The 515 Fantasy Football Listener League is presented by Iowa Firecracken. Iowa-owned, Iowa-operated, America-approved. Find them online at firecracken.com. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter at iFirecracken. Reminder, their Windsor Heights location off I-235 in the 8th Street, 73rd Street exit. Open for business beginning December 10. December 10. Fireworks of all shapes, sizes, colors, all reasonably priced. They're back on sale December 10. We hope if you're in the market, you choose to buy local from 3 guys that have been supporting the show all season long. We can't thank them enough for that. Big fantasy football guys as well, and they love their beautiful things that go boom. If you do too, Iowa Firecracken, the way to go. A recap of Week 11 of the Listener League before we wrap up for this week. My squad, now firmly entrenched in the playoff hunt, continues its streak of sheer dominance, a nearly 20-point thumping of Petty and the Jets. Final score 105.88 to 86.52. Brian's team officially off the schneid, while Boomin continues to crumble like his Cowboys. Ouch! Final in this one, 88.86 to 20. You heard me correctly, 20. Fantasy points for our guy, Matty. Nathan Peterman would be jealous, but that's really about it. Yikes. Mugu Kai in a pan had himself in a week. Stir-frying Taco Corp, 152.86 to 110.86. Steve's Annihilators helped his cause in a beatdown over the artist formerly known as Comb the Desert, 120.90 to 97.84. Free Willy harpoons our lovable loser Oink by a score of 109.70 to 75.08. And Russell Wilson's Big Monday Night saves the Purple People Eaters' perfect season. E for effort out of Phillips Bolo tie, but it wasn't enough. The purple one notches another, 108.72 to 100.20. This week, my squad will keep moving on up, looking to leapfrog the artist formerly known as Comb the Desert, who's officially on a losing streak, I'd like to point out. Brian's team in the mood for Porterhouse this week, trying to take down the Moo Cow guy. Taco Corp trying to get back on the winning track, facing off against Oink. Steve-O in the next in line to try to knock the Purple People Eaters off the perfect pedestal. Petty and the Jets face off against Phillips Bolotai in the junior varsity quarterfinals. And Free Willy Guy will try not to suck too bad this week, getting a crack at Boomin, who's been doing anything but of late. Good luck to one and all except for ED Comb-Over Guy. You suck. That's it for this week's show. You know what I'm thankful for on this Thanksgiving 2017? I'm thankful for all of you. You know, many of you that listen to this show are regular listeners and have been for a long time. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, really appreciate it. This year's been obviously pretty challenging, especially the last few weeks. Doing our best here. And I appreciate all the kind words you've shared with me. I appreciate you listening. I hope you'll come back next week. That means you're still in the playoff hunt, right? Until next week, good luck in Week 12. I'm Andy Hall. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio.